Ano yung, ano mo doon? Parang may rank kayo doon sa De La Salle. Si Professor Castro is some, ano yung, parang may rank ang professor doon. Hindi, meron siyang parang senior, ano? Senior professor. Distinguished professor. Ang, iba kasi sa UP. Anyway, sige, let's start with ano siguro. Ano yung assessment mo dun sa magiging impact ng Trump presidency sa relasyon natin sa Amerika?
Maraming pong salamat and great to be here again. And there are a lot of speculations po pagdating sa recent electoral development sa United States with the start and the beginning of Trump 2.0, you know, with President-elect Trump taking the White House once again. Now, just last night, I was actually in a panel discussion ng Wilson Center sa US along with colleagues from South Korea, Japan, and India that were really concerned about ano kaya mangyayari sa region. And I think that it's not only within the US, pero syempre napapaisip din yung mga partners ng, and allies ng United States is how do we navigate through this complexity and through this sort of potential uncertainty, right? When it comes to the Philippines, I'd like to begin by saying that I don't expect any radical shift na magkakaroon sa alliance natin, particularly in the field of defense and security. Let me tell you why. The Philippine-US alliance today has become so consequential to the interests of both the United States and the Philippines. When it comes to the alliance, in just 2 years under President Marcos Jr. and under the Biden administration, na-institutionalize na po natin ang alliance to serve as a hub between like-minded, as a hub for cooperation between and among like-minded partners and key U.S. allies in the Western Pacific and the Indian Ocean. So you see the Philippine-U.S. alliance serving as an important element, as a fulcrum for cooperation from east to west. Let me give you an example. Nandito po yung trilateral arrangement ng Philippines, Japan, and the US. Meron po tayong Squad in addition with Australia. Meron po din tayong multilateral arrangements with the Squad countries along with Canada, along with Europe. European countries are increasingly looking at the Philippine-US alliance as a fulcrum for their interests in the region. And we have shown that because we are active stakeholders in the Indo-Pacific's maritime domain to maintain the rules-based order there, and we are more than happy to work with like-minded countries within the region and beyond. So that's one particular reason why it would be difficult to digress from where we are right now. Kasi consequential po ito, not just for Philippine interests, but for US interests. Let's go to the second point. Under the Trump administration, we've all heard about the concept of America First. Right? And the idea of America First is not necessarily centered on values or yung, a very rigid, value-driven approach, in the Indo-Pacific particularly. What it's after is an American First policy being operationalized in the Indo-Pacific will center on U.S. preeminence, the influence of the U.S. in the Indo-Pacific. And it is an undeniable fact that China is the most consequential challenge to U.S. interest in the region. Hindi mawawala yan, and we cannot misconstrue that China is not, the major challenge of the United States. In fact, in the U.S., it's known, it's established. There have been several reports that have highlighted this particular fact. Now, when you have a president that seeks preeminence in the region, right? When you want to seek preeminence in the region, you would need to ensure that the challenger or the threat to that preeminence is checked all throughout. So in this regard, I do not think that Trump would let go of its key priority areas in the Indo-Pacific when it comes to the US-China power competition. And with that, central po ang Philippine-US alliance, along with the several other alliances that the US has. Now, some may argue na Trump wanted to withdraw or at least decrease its position sa Europe along with allies in Europe. And kaya nagkakaproblema ngayon yung NATO countries. They're thinking about what should we do. France and Germany are now consolidating efforts to see how we could address a number of issues in Europe, to address this development in U.S. national politics. But I don't think that this would be the same case in the Indo-Pacific, given that the region is of absolute significance for U.S. long-term interests. And because since this region has become the source of dynamicism and growth, prosperity, and security for the next few decades at least, right? So the third point here that I'd like to make is Trump is a businessman, right? So when you are a businessman, you know that when you have assets, right, you don't just let go of those assets. You try to bank on them as much as you can. And yes, and one of the most important assets that the US possesses towards its interests would be its allies and like-minded partners, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. Given, of course, geographical constraints, given a number of other issue areas that the US faces in the Atlantic and across, I don't think that it would be a practical choice for the Trump administration to forego its position in the Indo-Pacific. Now, let's talk about the challenges naman. I mean, we're quite optimistic, but there are obviously challenges that we need to prepare for. Now, one of the major challenges is that Trump is known to be a transactional leader. Right? What does that mean? What does that mean for us? Okay, so when we talk about transactionalism, we would need, right, Manila would need to endeavor to position itself effectively within Trump's transactional perspective of international politics. So that means that we would need to enhance our level of negotiation. We should make sure that the dialogues remain open and consistent with Washington, letting Washington know that our issues are not just our issues, but also issues that greatly concern and affect U.S. interests. We need to get that on the table as much as possible to maintain consistency in policy direction. I think that we could learn greatly from the former Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. Now, there were concerns in East Asia, particularly in South Korea and Japan, regarding the possible foregoing of commitments of the Trump administration 1.0 towards East Asian security. But when it comes to Trump, personality matters. Personality matters when it comes to Trump. Shinzo Abe has shown that because he was able to build such a positive rapport with then President Trump, Japan was able to maximize its key interests in the Indo-Pacific through the US-Japan alliance. And in fact, it was able to maximize the significance and utility of the alliance considerably during that period. Now, let's go back to the Philippines. Diba? When it was Trump 1.0, it was under former President Duterte, right? And it's unfair to say that the US did not reach out. In fact, it was under the Trump administration when the US clarified the geographical scope of the Mutual Defense Treaty, right? Encompassing the South China Sea, which was not even done under the Obama administration. When Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, came to Manila, that's what he stated. He provided a clear position in this regard. So, but what the problem was that we weren't able to maximize our partnership with the US then because we were giving the US the cold shoulder. We were not interested in deepening our partnership to that level because we were worried about upsetting China at that point. We had the idea of appeasement na if we underplay and if we sort of marginalize sovereignty and sovereign rights claims natin na legitimate based on UNCLOS, based on the 2016 arbitral ruling in the West Philippine Sea, that we would be able to gain significant economic concessions from China. That did not work out, economically speaking. Kaya nag-U-turn tayo sa bandang huli. But it was too late, di ba? But that only emboldened China further to possess more aggressive, assertive activities even under our appeasement approach kay former president.
Yeah. Professor, Trump 1.0, dalawang natandaan ko dyan about security. Sabi niya, yung NATO, ang economy ng European countries, nakaalyado ng US, equivalent sa economy ng US. And yet, they are underspending sa kanilang defense. Pangalawa, ang description niya sa Middle East, it's nothing but blood and sand. Yung statement lang yun, ito ba'y tatama ng America First Policy at iko-connect ko yung sinabi nyo na vital cog ang Pilipinas sa American interest. Now we are part or priority of their American interest. Mas makikita ba natin yung movement ng military assets ng US papuntang ito sa bahagi ng Indo-Pacific?
Well, I think that's a great question, sir. And I think that would also depend kung gaano tayo ka-assertive sa pag-negotiate when it comes to engaging with the United States. And if we talk about it, if we lay these options on the table, mapapag-usapan yan. And I think that given the trajectory of Indo-Pacific geopolitics, that is not impossible. With the U.S. engaging more effectively militarily with the Philippines is something that is something that is well within the reach of the U.S.-Philippine alliance under Marcos Jr. and Trump. So, given the proactivity na pinapakita ni President Marcos Jr., I think na nagkaroon na nga sila ng immediate interaction through text. So, there is that initiative from Manila to proactively work with the U.S. and vice versa. So, I think may possibility yun.
Ano bang kinakatakutan natin sa Indo-Pacific side? Ang Russia, ang economy nila is smaller than the economy of South Korea, smaller than the economy of Australia, smaller than the economy of India, of course, smaller than the economy of Japan. Kalahati lang sila economy ng Japan. Economy ng China, mas malaki dyan economy ng Quad, kahit alisin ng US. So assuming for the sake of discussion, na yung option o yung definition ng America First Policy, kakala sila dito sa defense commitment. May tatayo ba, may kayang tumayo sa area nito ng Indo-Pacific kapalit ng leadership na pinoprovide ngayon or the nuclear deterrence na binibigay sa atin ng US?
Well, yun nga po. Well, first of all, I don't think that magkakaroon ng ganong klaseng withdrawal ang US dito sa Indo-Pacific. I don't think that would happen anytime soon kasi consequential tong region na to for the America First Policy. We are in the battleground. And like any proactive actor, you would have to make use of what you can given your limitation. Syempre, the US's power projection capabilities and influence is not the same level as it was during yung 20th century. So it has to maximize the alliance. And yung Quad nga, the reinvigoration of the Quad 2.0 happened under Trump because the US has realized that it needs to bank on particular allies. And sinabi niyo nga po, Russia's economy is very small and it's far inferior compared to China. And the challenge in the Indo-Pacific is China. And China's capability, China does not only have the material capability, but it also has the willpower to provoke US national interest here. So I think that this region would be, if not one of but the key priority area of the US under the Trump administration. And we saw that na-declassify ang Indo-Pacific framework, Indo-Pacific strategy ng Trump administration nung paalis na siya sa White House. And it was clear there how the US-China competition was really a pillar in US foreign policy. Now, here's the point that I was making earlier. The challenge here is for us to maintain our position in Trump's America First transactional viewpoint of the world. And this would require a lot of proactive negotiation from our part. Now, I feel that under this current administration, we have the capacity to do that. So I'm not really so worried about that perspective. Yung worry ko lang po is yung economic aspect. Now, if I may, when we talk about the economic aspect, di ba, there's this idea called friendshoring. Naging quite popular na to under the Biden administration. Ano ba yung friendshoring? Friendshoring means that amidst the US-China power competition, nandun din yung economic competition, friendshoring basically means rerouting US investments towards friendly countries. So along with economics, nandun yung political alignment aspect. But we all know companies, private companies, are profit-based ang interest nila. So to have someone in the White House sort of create conditions and concessions to say na we need to invest in friendly countries kahit walang, the profit-based issue is not as heightened. I don't think that's going to happen under Trump. Kasi under Trump, money matters, profit matters. And pagdating sa investment climate natin, I think that this is an opportunity for us to do more. Kasi we have been sort of lagging behind investments pagdating sa, when we compare it to our immediate neighbors, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, sila yung major destination of investments. So this is a challenge that we have to take into consideration. So yun po yung iniisip ko na that's one of the challenges that we may face. But I think that it's also an opportunity that would serve us well for the long term.
Professor, may question ako tungkol sa defense. Do you expect a vastly increased military cooperation between the Philippines and the US? We know that deploying ng US ng missiles dito sa Philippines. Actually sa Lobos Norte. Can we expect the Trump administration to further increase yung military build-up dito? And second, insofar as transactionalism is concerned, do you expect a vastly improved economic cooperation then sa Trump administration?
Thank you, sir. And pagdating sa defense cooperation, I think that it is a possibility na ma-maintain, ma-sustain, or even ma-enhance pa ang US military presence dito in partnership with the alliance, Philippine-US alliance. But again, that would also depend on how well we are able to indicate that this is our interest as well. To ensure that Trump understands that our concerns are also the concerns of the US, the broader concerns, that would add more momentum. Yung ability natin to get it on the table at a personal level with Trump is important as well. And we've seen throughout his administration, such negotiations gain fruit, significant fruit, right? And under his former administration, we saw a lot of important activities kahit na may iba sa kanila na former President Duterte sort of sidelined. Hindi tayo magkakaroon ng drills or all these things for a temporary period. Pero when the Philippines ended up deciding to make that U-turn, given na wala naman tayong economically na napala from China, and at the same time it emboldened its position, you have to remember yung largest balikatan from that time happened under that period then, towards the end, 2022. So at that point, that was the largest balikatan. So I think that, it's a matter of interest from both sides, but it's just a matter of continuity in political will from both sides to get the conversation going. I think that's it may seem to be like a minor issue, but it is a huge issue, especially under Trump administration. And pagdating sa economics naman po, your second question, I do hope that economic cooperation will enhance even more. But I guess we have to do more in terms of improving, like I've said earlier, our domestic economic conditions. Given that we are a net importing country that is highly reliant on foreign direct investments, I think that we should look at this as an opportunity to improve our domestic economic climate. And I think that would be favorable for a more robust commercial relationship with the United States.
Yung Biden administration gave assurances that the MDT is meron. Do you expect Trump to reiterate this policy or even raise it to a higher level?
Absolutely. As I've mentioned earlier, sir, it was under the Trump administration kung saan clarify na the South China Sea is within the scope of the MDT. And dun din in-emphasize ulit yung pagka-ironclad commitment ng US and yung Philippines. But as I've mentioned before, hindi natin na-maximize yun because of the lack of personal rapport between former President Duterte and President Trump, or then President Trump. So I feel that now we would be able to do more. We would be able to do more. And I think that the fact na immediately nag-interact sina President Marcos Jr. and President-elect Trump is already a positive sign. There were only a few leaders who were quick to engage with the President-elect Trump. Kasama na rin doon si Prime Minister Modi. Again, they had a phone call conversation right away. Because personality matters. They know personality matters pagdating sa relationship with Trump. And we have to maintain that position while also ensuring na tuloy-tuloy ang ginagawa natin para sa interest natin based on the 2016 arbitral ruling, UNCLOS, and all that.
May binanggit kayo about friendshoring. If friendshoring hindi magaganap masyado sa panahon ni Trump, mapapalitan ba yung supposedly benefit natin sa ilalim ng friendshoring dun sa looming tariff na binanggit ni Trump bago siya maging presidente? Binanggit nga ng Trump 1.0. 2 days ago, muli niyang binanggit yung weaponization of tariff against China. Makikinabang ba tayo rito?
Well, ganito po yun. Yeah, absolutely true. Sabi po ni President-elect Trump, again, na lahat ng imports lalagyan na ng tariff and yung pinakamalaking percentage ay yun na sa China. Yes, this should be an opportunity for us because this would allow us to ensure na we can be one of the alternatives, right? In terms of economic cooperation amidst yung most likely the ongoing trade war that has occurred since 2017. But that would also involve us making an investment in enhancing our skill set, for instance. And I think one area that needs to be addressed is in manufacturing sector. And the U.S. is also looking for partners. I mean, if we look into the trajectory of U.S. manufacturing, pa-decline na rin. And with a lot of opportunities in store, along with our partners, we could look into third-party cooperation. Tulad ng nakikita natin po with South Korea, to revive our shipbuilding industry. Nagkaroon recently ng Track 1.5 meeting organized by the Korea Foundation Strat-based ADR Institute that really tried to uncover the potential for more robust cooperation, not only bilaterally, but with the US and Japan then. So I think the key to offsetting our limitations, nationally speaking, is to also enhance and expand our alliance with the US with other like-minded partners. Yan ang trend na yun. Area-specific arrangements are the go-to now. And I think that the Philippines has benefited within these few years alone. And I think that if we continue to institutionalize such partnerships, marami pa tayong ma-achieve. And this would also involve yung argument na sabi ni Trump 1.0, burden sharing has to be emphasized. And if we get more actors involved, for instance, that would make it more equitable in that regard. And I think that because of the diplomacy of President Marcos Jr., we have positioned ourselves favorably among like-minded countries to the point that countries as far as the Czech Republic, as far as Poland, likes to work with the Philippines. And I think that we must take that to our advantage, especially now when we see some shifts in U.S. national politics, but in a way that would also enhance the economic stability of the region. So I think that we have an important role to play. Hindi po tayo marginal actor. The Philippines is not a marginal actor in the Indo-Pacific. We are at the geographical heart of the Indo-Pacific, and we must leverage our position there. We are already gaining the attention, East and West. We must continue that through political continuity.
Professor, we have witnessed the increasing numbers of EDCA sites in the country under the Biden presidency. Will this continue under Trump? Number one. And number two, is there a need for the Marcos administration to recalibrate or redefine its pivot to Washington policy? And if so, how can this be achieved?
That's an excellent question. So I'll try to answer that in 2 or 3 points. When it comes to the EDCA sites, I think, well, first of all, nabanggit ni President Marcos Jr. na there's no intention to increase the number from the 9, right? But when we talk about U.S. commitment sa mga EDCA sites na yun, especially since it's cost-related din, it's U.S. cost as well. This is what I've discussed earlier. This is where we come in to show why these matter. And they do. They do matter because of the geographical position of the Philippines. I don't think that the Trump administration would find any other country that has the political will and the geography, to attain and to achieve or to help and supplement U.S. national interest as well, which are also ways that would also help our interest. So I think in that regard, there may be a possibility na magkaroon ng, in worst case scenario, negotiations on how to sort of manage the costs sa mga EDCA sites na yun. But to say na it would digress from where we are now, I don't think that we could see that radical change. Yung second point naman is, while the U.S.-Philippine alliance remains as a de facto cornerstone in our foreign policy, I say de facto because we enumerate 3 major areas in our foreign policy. But you can look at the United States as an official de facto element in our foreign policy calculations as well. We must also continue and pursue multi-alignment. The continuous diversification of partners will only complement what we are trying to do. So I think that what we are currently doing now, working with as many partners as possible who share the same vision and objectives in the region, is, I think, absolutely important. So we have to continue that as well. Given, of course, that we cannot rule out na magkakaroon ng mga unpredictable scenarios in the long run. So, as any practical and pragmatic sovereign nation, we must continue to maximize our multi-aligned approach as well, based on like-mindedness, share the vision for the region.
Professor, doon sa Trump 1.0, yung seeming withdrawal o lessening ng military commitment ng US dito sa Indo-Pacific, nagkaroon ito ng bulong-bulungan. At least 4 na bansa dito sa area ng Indo-Pacific ang gustong kumatok sa exclusive nuclear club. Natutol kaya ng lesson ng Trump administration na yung bulong lamang nakakalas ka sa Indo-Pacific, 4 na bansa sa lugar na ito, ang overnight gagawa ng kanilang sariling nuclear deterrence?
I mean, absolutely. I think that's part of the calculation then. I mean, there have been debates, not official, pero internal debates among academics sa South Korea pa lang, for instance. Japan, for instance. Yeah. So, I think these are consequences of the, on one hand, heightened structural challenges in the Indo-Pacific and concerns about how committed the U.S. would be in the long run. So I think that Washington must ensure through engagement that, it's here to stay. And I think that this is a stabilizing element in the Indo-Pacific, but it's a matter of diplomatic engagement as well. How well the U.S. would be integrated in the foreign policy calculations of particular states. As I mentioned, Japan has been quite successful, even under Trump 1.0, to maximize the security aspect of the U.S.-Japan alliance. Unfortunately, South Korea wasn't able to do that to that extent, but I believe South Korea has also learned how to negotiate under a Trump 2.0. Meron na tayong experience. And for the Philippines, we would be able to compare it to what happened during the previous administration. So we've seen that there is willingness, but there has to be some sort of momentum from both sides. And I think now we would have that momentum as well. So yeah.
Professor, sa ibang bagay ng security, si Trump ito, nakikita nyo bang muling gagamitin ng China yung kanilang kakayahan sa cyber warfare? Now, pag pinapanood natin yung TikTok, lahat ng halos ng mensahe doon ay pinakihina ang ating kalooban para tumindig laban sa aggressiveness ng China. At paging sa Facebook at iba pang mga social media platform, tanong ko sa inyo, yung bang ginawa ng India, ginawa ng Canada, na pinagbawal ang TikTok, dapat gamitin na rin sa Pilipinas?
Well, clearly, yung mga social media platforms na ito, and not only TikTok, as you've mentioned, Facebook, and all other popular social media sites have become an avenue for China's malign information operations, disinformation campaigns, which are harmful to the core of our national interest. We have to understand na ang expansionist ambitions ng China, particularly in the West Philippine Sea, its ambitions are not limited to the physical realm. Misinformation, disinformation, information operations, yung tinatawag na sharp power projection, monopolizing the information source of a democratic country, infiltrating that to create political discord, right? So what were the goals of China what have been the goals of China under the Marcos Jr. administration through yung malign information operations niya? One is to weaken Manila's political will, tarnish the credibility of the U.S.-Philippine alliance and extended alliance network. And third is to ensure that the public would not support the Marcos Jr. administration's proactive position in securing the West Philippine Sea based on international law. But thankfully, and based on international reports that are very credible, such as Freedom House, for instance, and ang mga very authoritative nationwide polls that have been conducted since 2022, nakikita po natin na limited ang impact ng malign information operations ng China dito sa Philippines. And that is because of the resiliency of the public. However, we should not be complacent. We are aware of the risks posed by such platforms, given of course their free nature. And yung ibang platforms like TikTok, they are easily manipulated to the point na they could serve as a challenge in creating a unified whole of a nation approach na gustong i-achieve ng current administration na ito. So we have to be mindful. So I'm not sure if we are to that extent na ibaban ang TikTok, for instance, like what India has done, for instance. And but we have to be aware. And I think there's awareness regarding the challenges that these pose. Because we have to look at this as beyond benign social media activity. This is an of China's expansionist ambitions to the West Philippine Sea. It has the time, it has the money, it has the technology. We, on the other hand, have been subjected to a far from consistent foreign policy na hinihintay lang ng China i-exploit, right? So we have to make sure na what we are doing now is institutionalized to the point, along with our cooperation, that despite changes in political headwinds in Manila in the future, that there would be elements of what this current administration is doing na intact pa rin. And that is our major challenge for now.
Professor, recently,
U.S. offered to escort Coast Guard and Navy resupply missions sa West Philippine Sea. Pero I understand late National Security Council has put its foot down on the proposal.
do you think it's still possible to go on with that?
Thank you, sir. I do not think that the Philippines, based on the National Security Council, that it has definitely said no. Sinasabi lang nila na we are trying to maximize whatever we can on our own first, but we are open to the idea. And I think that that openness, and I believe that, that openness is still there. But the thing is that we would not like to right away show na, we are going full force on this area, especially since nagkaroon tayo ng provisional arrangement, for instance, which I am still quite skeptical of, given the fact na after the provisional arrangement, few weeks after, nagkaroon tayo ng problema sa Pina Shoal, sa Escoda Shoal, right? So that's basically showing that China wants to offset its limitations, temporary limitations sa ayungin para lang mag-maximize ng ibang interests niya in terms of power projection sa Escoda o sa Pina Shoal. So we've seen yung harassment na ginawa sa BRP Teresa Magbanwa, for instance. So this is why I say that I'm still watching kung ano man yung end result, or at least yung long-term trajectory ng provisional arrangement. And I think that that's what the Philippines is doing. But I believe that the US and the Philippines are in constant negotiation. Nung dumating yung Indo-Pacific commander ng Indo-PACOM, that reiterate yung idea na yun. We are with that resupplying joint escorts, for instance, is well within the mandates of the US-Philippine alliance. But again, because our MDT, for instance, is based on consultation, that this would be a consultative process talaga. And I think that the conversation is ongoing. I think that both sides are equally wary of kung ano man na nangyayari, and I think that they would take the right steps when necessary. So, in that regard, I think that open pa rin ang option to the country.
Should we now go to yung security, yung China question, especially yung bagong laws?
Governing maritime zones and archipelagic sea lanes. Ano yung tingin mo?
These are very important, and I've written about this sa Nikkei Asia nung speech ni President Marcos Jr., the third SONA speech. And I was hoping na in the near future ma-establish ito, to operationalize the maritime zones law that we see today, for instance. It's very important because of three particular aspects. One, the Maritime Zones Law, right? The Maritime Zones Law ensures and clarifies that the maritime zones of the Philippines are in accordance with international law, in accordance with UNCLOS and the 2016 arbitral rule. And that strengthens our legal position for the West Philippine Sea. And that shows them that we are taking that initiative to recognize that we need to ensure and strengthen our legal position as an active stakeholder of the Indo-Pacific's maritime domain based on a rules-based order. So I think that this is very important to not only symbolically send that message, but to operationally indicate it as well. Second, this would also empower yung activities ng Philippine Coast Guard and Philippine Navy in enforcing particular rules that have been enshrined under the Maritime Zones Law. So this include, for instance, activities that can and cannot be taken within Philippine waters. So that is also that empowerment aspect that is also crucial. And third, most importantly, is to ensure that we are maximizing whatever we can, right? To maximize whatever we can at the national level to show na we are doing all we can to secure the West Philippine Sea. So if we do not leverage on at least our national legislation, what will our partners say about us? Na, you're trying to go outward, but what are you doing inside? And I think this is a very important thing. But however, this also, the fourth point, may fourth point pa pala. The fourth point is, this also significantly aligns with the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, which puts the security of Philippine archipelagic waters, the exclusive economic zone, our territorial waters, at the front and center of our maritime security interests. And the Maritime Zones Law and the other legislation, for instance, would provide more significance in its operationalization since adopted na ang comprehensive archipelagic defense concept. So this is important but must be supplemented with our partnerships externally to better enforce them. So our strategy, given that we are asymmetrically driven by the power competition between the US and China and the Philippines and China, we are on the back foot in terms of material capabilities. So in that regard, kailangan, just like Vietnam, in fact, kailangan marami tayong elements to our approach. We have the Transparency Initiative, we have our national legislation, we have proactive partnerships with our partners. Singling out one element would constrain our capacity. So our approach must be a collection of these elements. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Professor, may kasabihan kasi, binagit mo kasi yung inward, ano? Nagpo-project tayo outward, pero paano yung inward? Yung the Pilipinas, just one election away from disaster. Imagine for more than 100 years, pro-American tayo. Nung ma-elect si Duterte, biglang naging pro-China. Ano mangyayari? Lahat ng pinagsasabi natin dito, isang election lang yan, nababaliwala.
Well, there is a lot of there's a lot of trauma kung ano nangyari in the past administration, how we were willingly able, sort of putting the West Philippines on a silver platter. Right? And but as we can see, our foreign policy, in fact, particularly since ang turn natin to maritime security cooperation, well, even if we look beyond that, if we look into the Arroyo administration, yung equibalancing between the US and China, the Aquino administration was more of hard balancing against China through the US alliance system. But under President Duterte, former President Duterte, I think yung shift natin towards China was the most radical, right? And which leads to your question, we could just be one election away. But however, I feel that it won't be as simple as that anymore because of the public consciousness then. Based on a recent national survey that was, I believe it is readily available. I'm not sure if it was Pulse Asia or SWS. Majority of Filipino respondents nationwide said, we would not want to elect a public official that would be pro-China. And I think that we would also see how that would go sa midterm election na mangyayari. So there is a recognition, right? And even though, for instance, even though a pro-China leader would sit down, the efforts that have been instilled under this current administration, we still have some time to institutionalize and strengthen it to make sure that even the most radical leader will face significant political costs to just easily rearrange our foreign policy trajectory. In the past, kulang yung institutionalization natin. It was out in the open for change. But recognizing what has happened before, we are incorporating a government plus civil society partnership that would ensure more continuity than change and would apply more cost even towards the most radical head of state. So in that regard, may optimism but may challenges rin.
Yeah.
So it's not smooth sailing talaga, but we have to do and we are doing what we can to ensure na hindi mauulit yun.
Kung ayaw ng Pilipino ng pro-China candidate, tanong ko sa inyo, paano naman malalaman ng karaniwang tao kung sinong pro-China? Wala naman silang public ID na sila pro-China. Ang example dyan, even in Australia, yung kanilang Labour Party, yung Democrat Party ng US, at maging yung Labour Party ng UK, yung Solomon Island, iisa yan. Nahuhuli nila ang spy ng China. Binibigyan ng pera pangkampanya ng mga politiko dyan. Sa atin pwede mangyayari yun?
That's true. Yung Solomon Islands nangyayari sa Pacific Islands and marami ring instances na nangyayari sa Indian Ocean region, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh for instance. That is because na-penetrate Maldives, na-penetrate ang information operations ng China. And that is something na we still have been able to push back. Pero that does not mean na we are completely free from this concern. Regarding what you have said, it's absolutely true. Na there may be instances na how would people know which are pro, which are anti? But I think that because our media covers various political leaders, many of which are also going for candidacies, I think with our media, they have been providing an important element for continuity in this regard by asking the hard questions as well. And I think that this is where we would be, pagkasama rin sa transparency. This is part of the Unfolding Transparency Initiative to understand each candidate's foreign policy trajectory, And, the West Philippine Sea issue has become a national a national narrative. It has become a national issue of discussion, which was not in place even under the Aquino administration, which is often seen as a geopolitical issue lang. Elitist ang security dynamics ng West Philippine Sea. Why should the common people care about it? But under the Transparency Initiative, seeing, for instance, what is happening to our fishermen at sea, yan yung unifying factor that I'm talking about that would help, not necessarily successfully filter out, but it would help. It would serve as a bigger pushback compared to what we have witnessed in the past. So I'm hopeful that this would add as an element. May not necessarily be as strong as we want it to, but nandun siya. And I think that we cannot disregard that element as well.
Do you think these two new laws will help the country gain more support from ASEAN for our position on the West Philippine Sea?
That's a very good question, sir. And I have two answers for that. All right. One is we should not expect much from ASEAN in terms of going beyond what ASEAN was built for, right? It was not really built for security defense cooperation. Yes, we hope na sana during such problematic periods where China has deliberately rammed our fishermen, our boats that go against international law and go against what ASEAN initially stood for, which is the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, na sana meron man lang mga statements, di ba? But even then, we realize the limitations of this aspect. At its core, ASEAN is intergovernmental, meaning it is driven by the individual interests of individual ASEAN states. Hindi patulad ng European Union that is supranational or may collective endeavor. Kaya nga may non-interference and adherence to sovereignty. Kasi that would be a prerequisite to saying na we would not want to get involved in your issue. However, because it is interest-based, there is and there have been instances and current occurrences that have shown na because medyo acute na ang challenges na face ng ilan sa mga Southeast Asian neighbors natin vis-a-vis China, nare-realize na we have to do more with our partners. Isa dyan ang Vietnam. China, since 2021, 2022, has been pushing, Vietnam against the wall in terms of its expansionist ambitions. One, yung Gulf of Tonkin. China has been pushing its claims further and further, which is something that was not initially considered to be the de facto agreement between Vietnam and China. Yung canal na pinoform ng China in Cambodia also directly infringes on Vietnam's national security concerns. And third, of course, the Mekong and yung recent incident at sea kung saan, the Vietnamese fishermen were subjected to Chinese harassment and physical harassment shows that, gives you that realization that Vietnam understands na yung expansionist ambitions ng China, walang favorites yan. And it's just a matter of time for other countries to follow suit. So anong ginagawa? We had our first Coast Guard to Coast Guard exercise with Vietnam. Yes, may limitations ito to non-traditional security. But the idea here is to increase confidence building and interoperability between and among claimant countries. ASEAN countries themselves have shown na very possible mag-resolve ng maritime border disputes. Very possible to. Indonesia and Vietnam, for instance, were able to conclude their overlapping maritime claims, the maritime EEZ nila. And I believe that such instances are not impossible for Vietnam and the Philippines as long as consistent tayo sa engagements natin with Vietnam, socializing our engagements with Vietnam. So hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, tayo naman magpapadala ng Coast Guard vessels natin to Vietnam, which is also unprecedented. So I think that this is an important aspect in solidifying our confidence building measures. So ano yung purpose nito? It's not just about training. It's about creating an understanding na we may not necessarily be able to resolve it right away, yung overlaps natin, but we would be able to set tones. We would be able to set de facto rules and norms kung paano natin collectively mag-govern tong overlapping area natin. And that would make it difficult for China to pursue divide and conquer.
Oh.
And hopefully that could follow suit with Malaysia, Brunei.
Yeah.
Pero syempre, sa Vietnam muna tayo.
Yung Malaysia nga, hindi ba inatake rin ng China? Lately, yung...
Yes, pero we notice na may konting divergence between yung political statements ng Malaysia sa ginagawa nila at sea. Politically, nag-downplay. Pero tuloy-tuloy pa rin ang unilateral action ng Malaysia within its EEZ, yung pagdating sa oil and gas fields niya, despite harassments ng China. So this shows you na hindi rin really mag-concede itong si Malaysia. It's trying to sort of ease down yung tensions, di ba? But on the operational level, and if you ask many from the Malaysian armed forces, the Navy for instance, they recognize the threat of China. And yung Cambodia nga, I was in a track 2 dialogue on ASEAN maritime security, not just sa Bali, Indonesia, and also sa Lao PDR before the ASEAN summit. And there was a clear recognition among Cambodians, for instance, na we understand it's not that we want to be a vassal state of China, but the thing is we need more options. So yan yung sinasabi ko with Quad countries. So you need to engage more with the Indo-China region to give them opportunities to lessen their dependence on China. And I think that we need to start there, diba? And I think that's an important step. There's that realization. Sinabi ni na President Marcos Jr. noon sa Lao na particular ASEAN countries were supportive of the idea na magkaroon ng joint activities, etc. So clearly, while there may be problems in saying it as a group, meron tayong individual understanding with particular ASEAN countries. And I think that we need to work on that. Socialize natin. Yung mga embassies natin abroad. This is another suggestion. Now we need to engage yung Philippine embassies with other ASEAN member embassies as well sa other countries. Tulad ng ginagawa ng mga Western leaders dito. Mga Western embassies, they get together to engage and all that. We need to do that sort of thing with our partners, particularly Vietnam. And I think that creates more opportunities for dialogue.
Sige,
Let's open the floor to questions from media.
Hi, Professor. Good morning. Christian Manio, GMADC Davao. It's your first question. With a lot of speculations on social media, do you think Trump is advantageous for the Philippines?
And how can we capitalize from this for the next 4 years?
Well, very simply, there's no perfect administration in the US that would perfectly provide us with whatever interest we would like to pursue. But we are at an advantageous position. And at the same time, I believe that we will be able to communicate our interests effectively under the Trump administration. It would require a lot more political will, a lot more negotiation from our part. But as I mentioned, I do not think the alliance would fall back, but rather worst case scenario would sustain. But I believe that there would be chances for it to expand further. Given, of course, that China has shown that it is unwilling to manage its expansionist ambitions based on international law. And that is a direct challenge to US preeminence in the region. So I think that, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of opportunities for us to work together on the security front. And I think that we will consider to push the partnership forward.
Pwede na po ba, sir, yung Maritime Zones Act? Can I ask about the Maritime Zones Act po?
We were talking.
Yeah, sir. Sorry, kararating ko lang. In terms of diplomatic strategies and international support, how do you think this act will impact the Philippines' diplomatic approach to the West Philippine Sea dispute? And could this pave the way for greater international support or alliances in the region?
Thank you. Let me reiterate 3 points again. The signing of the Maritime Zones Act, for instance, provides us with a lot of opportunity. One, it clearly emphasizes that our maritime zones are in line with UNCLOS, international law, the 2016 arbitral ruling. So we are at a clear international law-based position. And there is no question regarding our sovereign rights, for instance, over the West Philippine Sea. So that's one. Second, that would allow us to set the terms and rules of engagement for foreign ships, foreign vessels that are surrounding or that are traversing through our waters based on this particular maritime zones law. And it would also enhance and empower the role of the Philippine Navy and the Philippine Coast Guard, our armed forces, to secure the West Philippine Sea. Third, or was I in the fourth now? What's that? The fourth point is this would also complement ang operationalization ng comprehensive archipelagic defense concept, which means that while we are putting the security of our maritime spaces at the forefront of our military modernization program, which is the purpose of the CADC, for the purpose of providing and securing the inalienable right of each Filipino towards the resources in the West Philippine Sea, Maritime Zones Law would be able to supplement that by adding a more legal framework to that operationalization. So in that regard, it's important. However, this must be supplemented with more physical deterrence. So dito papasok yung mga partners natin in order to better enforce the Maritime Zones Law. Given our military limitations vis-a-vis China, for instance, we would need to work more robustly with our partners. And I think that the U.S. sees this. You know, what is under Trump administration? The idea of burden sharing is for countries and allies to give initiative, to show initiative. And that's what we have been doing so far. And that's why I'm quite optimistic that we would not digress from where we are now. But of course, we have a lot of work to do in other aspects of getting our point across, getting our interest across on the table. So yes.
Sabi sa Dario, the Chinese Foreign Ministry sa explain yung dalawang laws.
If you were to put yourself in the shoes of our ambassador, how would you respond to this?
Well, you know that's the thing. I think that's a natural reaction from China. And anything we do to protect what is rightfully ours based on international law, ay hindi nila gusto, because that is a direct challenge to their expansionist interest. Pero syempre, because our Philippine ambassador is there, most likely they would ask for clarification. And I think the most simple clarification is that this is in line with UNCLOS, which China is a party of. So I think that there should be no confusion. You could read through the Maritime Zones Law and you could see the clear convergence with UNCLOS, of which China is also a party of. So if you are in support of UNCLOS, then there should be no issue with the Maritime Zones Law.
Just to follow up, sir, what would be its impact to the regional stability? Could the implementation of the Maritime Zones Act heighten tensions in the West Philippine Sea? Are we creating some kind of aggression here?
No, there's nothing aggressive about enforcing international law. I mean, that is the counter narrative that we are trying to sort of push back. Because kaya nga may international law. It's to govern all seas and oceans. UNCLOS is not just for West Philippine Sea. It's for the whole, the whole swath of oceans across the world. So to say that if we are doing something in line with the international law na provocative yun, what are we doing? What is international law for? Right? We should be concerned about those countries that do not accept international law. Throw that question to them. Diba? But as far as we are concerned, even though we know that it is well within our rights to do so, legal rights, we are also socializing this decision with many of our partners in the region and beyond as well, to let them know what it's all about. But to say that it is provocative is a non-issue to begin with. There's nothing provocative about upholding international law. Kaya nga nagkaroon ng ASEAN. And that's why ASEAN wanted to have countries earlier sign yung Treaty of Amity and Cooperation before getting into yung ARF, yung East Asia Summit. Other countries say, oh, it's provocative. Why would you want us to sign it? There's nothing provocative because it is in line with what international law states. The reason now is because mas naging acute ang competition to the point that anything could be deemed to be provocative. But if we look at it objectively, it's in line with international law. And if we say we are abiding by international law, then this is merely an extension of that.
But how do you think China would respond to this, possibility of a pushback or escalation?
China will obviously be frustrated. Anything, as I mentioned, anything that we will do to secure what is rightfully ours based on international law is against an interest of any expansionist power. So we'll hear a lot of words, maybe from yung MOFA nila, or maybe from any sector from the government, stating that this is a provocative issue, that this is complicating the situation at hand, etc. But it's a natural reaction from them. We have to persevere. We have to continue, and we have to address this. We are on the defensive. We are not poking the bear. The bear is poking us. But still, we are defending of what is left of the status quo rather than trying to change it or revise it. So our position.
Former justice,
At the same time, the Trump administration rejected nearly all of China's expansionist claims in the West Philippine Sea. So there is a clear realization na significant ang security ng West Philippine Sea. If China continues to make inroads there, we have to understand that there are US sites there as well, right? So I think that it will be in the interest of the Trump administration to maintain an active presence there. Pero yun nga, during the previous administration, hindi in-encourage ang joint drills within the EEZ of the Philippines. Hanggang territorial sea lang daw. But under Marcos Jr., we are seeing so many multilateral patrols sa EEZ natin. So I think that's an important precedent. And I think that's something that the US will continue to prioritize. And baka nga, tumaas pa yung defense budget ng US, which would also be advantageous for us. So in that regard, again, it's a matter of the communication, the coordination between the two allies. Yung mutual defense treaty nga po is anchored on the Council of Foreign Ministers. So meaning how our foreign ministries are able to coordinate based on shared concerns would matter a lot for the trajectory of the alliance. And even the former administration may push back din from the foreign policy establishment, from the defense establishment. So in that regard, in this case, we can see more cohesion under the current administration. But given, of course, as you mentioned, sir, may time frame tayo for the presidency, we have to make sure na grounded na yung ginagawa natin to ensure na may continuity. So that would involve rallying public support. That would involve institutionalizing partnerships with our ally and our partners, and doing what we can at the national level, like Maritime Zones Law, for instance. We have to do a lot of these things collectively, to ensure na at one way or the another, there is continuity in this pressing issue on the West Philippine Sea, which has gained national importance compared to how it was decades ago.
Considering na ang definition ni Trump ng kapayapaan is peace through strength, tapos yung reinterpretation ng Japan sa kanilang defense concept sa Constitution, yung jittery feeling ng South Korea sa pagpasok ng North Korea sa bagong level ng alyansa Russia, at yung Look East policy ni Prime Minister Modi. Would you say na ngayon ang pagkakataong pinakamaganda para sa Pilipinas na ipursu ang ating interest sa West Philippine Sea?
Yes, absolutely. And nandun na tayo. So we are in a very favorable position. Not only geographically. Geographically, nasa heart po tayo ng Indo-Pacific. But politically and diplomatically rin. And yes, yung national defense strategy, national security strategy ng Japan noong 2022 was reinterpreted to be more security-driven, right? To be a capacity builder and to be more involved sa security interests and concerns ng like-minded Indo-Pacific countries. Ang Act East policy ni Prime Minister Modi is about engaging bilaterally, multilaterally to enhance the capacity of like-minded friends in Southeast Asia. We have seen a lot of important developments in the India-Philippines relationship. And now, hopefully, we're looking for an MOU between the Philippines and India for defense acquisition. So parang an umbrella arrangement, which is very important then. So I think that, and not just these countries, France, the United Kingdom, are all looking to the Philippines to work closer with us in security issues. Because European countries are faced with geographical constraints. kailangan nila ng like-minded and trusted anchor. And we said, now while we are defending what is rightfully ours, we are more than happy to cooperate with other like-minded countries who also share the same vision as us. And that is important.
Nabanggit nyo kanina yung Southeast Asia na hindi naman ginawa para alyansa. Ang term nga dyan description diplomatically is NATO. No action, talk only. Talk lang ang ASEAN. May development dito kasi I think 2 months ago, na-publish na rin ito sa ilang mga international publication. Yung tubig sa Mekong River is 40% less nang dumadaloy doon as late as 2 years ago. Kasi dinivert ng China yung mga tubig. Yung bang single incident na ito, of course alam natin ng Mekong. Lifeblood ito ng Indo-China region. Isa yun sa dahilan kung bakit ang Cambodia nagsasalita na hindi naman sila pro-China. Gusto.
Online users. So, yeah.
May follow-up question ako dyan. Sa Australia, by next week or by next month, may ipapasa silang batas na between below 15 years old, hindi pwedeng pumasok sa social media ang kanilang mga citizen. Dapat ba rin nating pag-aralan yan sa atin?
I think it's important na tingnan muna natin anong nangyayari sa Australia. Because first of all, that would be an important case study for us. Kailangan natin ng case study. I mean, this is something that we would do for a first time if ever. So tingnan muna natin how a fellow democracy would fare. Obviously, we may expect na magkaroon ng mga protests saying na human rights, freedom, etc. So tingnan natin anong gagawin nila and maybe we can get some best practices there.
Professor, would you like to ban TikTok?
Yeah, I mean, it poses danger. I think it's something more complicated to ban something like that. The same way, for instance, India was able to do right away. Given, of course, I believe na monetize then. I mean, you earn from that as well, and many users from the Philippines have also earned as well from yung mga social media platforms. And so it becomes a socio-economic issue na rin to immediately ban. That's India. What they did was they immediately took it off, allowing not giving any chance to be properly utilized, diba? So to the point na naging source of entertainment lang siya. But I think that this is something that we must critically study, especially yun nga with what's happening and what other of our friends are doing. Kailangan natin what the US would do, let's see what Trump would do. I think isa din yan, baka i-promote yung American version ng TikTok, which is, I don't know, baka meron na. But, India tried to do that, an Indian version of TikTok then. So we could look into these alternatives. But nagiging from just entertainment, nagiging socio-economic issue na rin po siya, which makes it difficult. And again, like sa Australia, I'm anticipating nagiging human rights issue din yan, in banning right away. So we have to be objective and sort of see what our friends are doing, and let's emulate some best practices kung ma-apply natin.
Sige. Wala nang questions from media. Sige, at this point, we'd like to thank our resource person, distinguished